in the tradition of Lou Thez, in the tradition of Jack Briscoe of the Briscoe Brothers, of Dory Funk Jr., or Terry Funk, the man who will not die. After the real nature boy, Buddy Rogers, upstairs tonight. From the Harley Races to the Barry Windhams to the Ric Flairs. I accept this heavyweight title. Wait a second. And Kerry Von Erich, and the fat man himself, Dusty Rhodes. This is it tonight, Dad. God, that's beautiful. And Ricky Steamboat. And they can all kiss my ass. Because I'm not the man who accepts a torch to be handed down to me from an organization that died RIP 7 years ago. The franchise, Shane Douglas, is the man who ignites the new flame of the sport of professional wrestling. Tonight, before God and my Father witness that I declare the franchise as the new ECW Heavyweight Champion of the world. We have set out to change the face of professional wrestling. So tonight, the new era begins. The era of sports professional wrestling. The era of the franchise. The era of ECW. How'd that work out for you, Shane? Honestly, how'd that work out for you, Shane? 30 years ago today, 30 years ago today, ECW was launched on the backs of the National Wrestling Alliance. My name is J Cal, and each and every Tuesday, I come to you to talk NWA wrestling. Notice how we don't talk about ECW. Notice how we don't talk about Shane Douglas or Tommy Dreamer or Rob Van Dam. We kind of do talk about Raven, though. We also talk about Steve Corino and Rhino. But that's because they're former NWA World Heavyweight Champions. And 30 years ago today, the NWA World title, the 10 pounds of gold? The 10 pounds of gold was unceremoniously tossed aside. When Shane Douglas threw the NWA Worlds Heavyweight Championship to the ground, many people had pontificated about the death of the National Wrestling Alliance. Didn't happen. It is the year 2024, 30 years later. And what are we doing, right? We are heading towards the 76th anniversary of the National Wrestling Alliance. 76 years. Most of you have not been alive for 76 years. Most of you do not remember a time where there was not an NWA. We lived before ECW. We have lived after ECW, excuse me. But there is no NWA. Let me rephrase that. There is no ECW. I'm jumbling up my words here. There is no ECW today, but there still is an NWA. And that's built on the backs of guys like, well, let's just look at it. EC3, who celebrates 1 year as NWA Worlds Heavyweight Champion. We don't get to EC3 unless Tyrus carries that belt for some time. And before Tyrus, we don't get there without Trevor Murdoch. And we don't get to Trevor Murdoch without Matt Cardona. We don't get to Matt Cardona without Trevor Murdoch again. We don't get to Trevor Murdoch without Nick Aldis. We don't get to Nick Aldis without Cody Rhodes and Nick Aldis again, and Tim Storm and Jack Stane and Hiroshi Tenzin and Rob Conway and Satoshi Kojima and Rob Conway and Tokyo Monster Kahagas and Scrap Iron Adam Pierce and Colt Boom Boom Cabana and Adam Pierce and Cabana and Adam Pierce and the Sheik and Colt Cabana and Adam Pierce and Blue Demon Jr. and Adam Pierce and Christian Cage and Sting. And now I'm going to get out of order here, but you just follow along, play along like I'm doing it right. And Rhino and Abyss and Jeff Jarrett like 3 times and Ron Killings 2 times and AJ Styles like 4 times and Shinya Hashimoto and Dan the Beast Severn twice. Ken Shamrock, I can't forget about Ken Shamrock. And every single person who held that title from 1995 when Chris Candido won a tournament to become World's Heavyweight Champion until now, that back has been built over and over and over again. Where do we see ECW now? Where is Shane Douglas now? And the sad answer is just a footnote in history, ladies and gentlemen. Part of a long storied past with Todd Gordon and Howard Brody and Dennis Corluzzo and backroom shenanigans and disagreements and New Japan Pro Wrestling exiting the NWA and World Championship Wrestling exiting the NWA. And all of this to say that where the NWA is today was built on the backs of the men who carried the 10 pounds of gold. And when Shane Douglas unceremoniously tossed the belt down, he thought he would cripple the NWA, thought he would launch ECW. And in the interim, he did. ECW, it wouldn't be long before ECW would end up on the Nashville network, TNN, Spike TV, as it would be called later. The stars of ECW would go on to WCW and the WWE, where the NWA would kind of flounder, right? After the franchise threw the belt down, it took them nearly a year to crown a new champion in Chris Candido. And he was, although a fantastic wrestler, it didn't feel like the NWA got behind him. And there wasn't much of an NWA at that time. It was Dennis Corluzzo. It was Steve Rickert in New Zealand. Howard Brody had just got in. We had just seen the last of Jim Crockett Jr. in Dallas. And so you had Chris Candido, who he wasn't even getting title defenses in his own home promotion of Smoky Mountain Wrestling with James E. Cornette, the man who you would think would love to promote the NWA Worlds Heavyweight title. And then as a hero in a shining armor that is the Octagon, we had Dan the Beast Severn, who would not only win the Ultimate Fight UFC 5 and become the UFC Ultimate Fighting Champion, he would also become the NWA Worlds Heavyweight Champion. And his entourage of Al Snow and Dennis Corluzzo would tromp to the ring carrying the 10 pounds of gold and his Super Fight title and his UFC 5 title, thus creating the greatest interest in the NWA since its formation, with Lou Thez unifying title belts in the early 50s, excuse me. And if it wasn't for Shane Douglas dispatching the title to the ground, I don't know that we would have ever gotten Dan the Beast Severn as World's Heavyweight Champion. We never would have seen the 10 pounds of gold on a Monday Night Raw. We'd have never seen the 10 pounds of gold showcased on UFC events. Maybe there never would have been an interest to have the World's Heavyweight Champion head to Japan and wrestle deathmatch gods like Goto. I think it was Goto. Now I don't have it written down in front of me. I forgot. But needless to say, it was kind of a blessing in disguise. It was a curse that became a gift. After Shane Douglas tossed that 10 pounds of gold down, and the work that Dan Severn and James E. Cornette and Dennis Corluzzo and Howard Brody and all the NWA members that would follow suit, including Antonio Inoki, Ken Taylor, Mike Porter, Jim Miller. All of this would create the foundation to what the NWA is today. It would give us title runs from guys like Steve Corino, Mike Rapata, Shinya Hashimoto. I mean, there was a lot of names in there that I can't possibly remember all of them off the top of my head. But yes, this was a very interesting time for the NWA. And 30 years ago today, it happened. And unbelievably, it just happens to coincide with our World's Heavyweight Champion having a 1-year reign as World's Heavyweight Champion. I have to acknowledge and give props to EC3 for what he's done in 1 year as World's Heavyweight Champion. I was trying to collaborate today with, going through title histories, going through cage match, going through my own personal records of how many title defenses that our pal EC3 has had. And, he has stated that it's somewhere near 75. And although there is a lot of title defenses, I don't think he's quite at 75. Cage match lists him at 41 since winning the championship. I know that there's about a dozen or so matches that aren't listed on cage match. Even the School of Morton, Ricky Morton's battleground for training pro wrestlers, featured over 5 NWA title matches, 4 of which happened in a weekend, 4 matches in 3 days for our World's Heavyweight Champion. So, needless to say, the man who's taken the title to Australia, who has taken the title to England, to Italy, to France, to Southern California, to Canada, all over the United States, we have to celebrate the 1-year reign of EC3 and acknowledge that a lot can change in 30 years, including the demise of Extreme Championship Wrestling, the territory that was NWA Eastern Championship Wrestling, and celebrate that the 10 pounds of gold still reigns supreme.